Yeah, as Dave said, I came here recently from Alaska, which appears on this slide here. And so I'm still getting used to Michigan. There are some differences, like that, for example. Also, when people talk about the something or other hills, I'm used to I'm used to something a little bigger than that. But when it comes to lakes, this place has got it. So this is Denali. This is it's actually called the Great One or the High One. That's what the name means in the original language, and tallest mountain in North America. So I came here. We actually arrived permanently in September. So around the middle of September, and hopefully you can see the pink line. So that was our epic journey. My wife and I, in 2 cars and a dog, came all the way to Michigan over 2 weeks. It was about 4,500 miles of driving, and through pretty spectacular Canadian Cordillera, and then actually some pretty cool stuff in the United States as well. And then we crossed the plains, and then we did go through the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which was quite pretty. The other places I've been, lived, were actually all pretty much on the same view. I grew up in Southern California, went to college there. Actually started graduate school at the University of Hawaii, which is actually just barely on this map here. Finished at University of South Carolina when my advisor moved. Did a postdoc at Stanford, and then 23 years in Alaska before coming here to Michigan. So what I study is active geological processes. I study motion, deformation, and mass transport of the Earth's surface. And what that means is plate tectonics. It means faulting, active faulting and tectonics. It means volcanism. It means the cryosphere and effects of the cryosphere. So the main tools are high precision space geodetic measurements of position and gravity change. So these are measurements that couldn't be made when I was actually an undergraduate student in all cases. So new technologies and new tools that have just opened up new areas of research. So here's, again, a little bit washed out, but this is an example of GPS measurements. We're actually setting up this antenna over a little marker in the ground and measuring the position of this marker. And the position itself isn't all that interesting to most people, but we can measure it precisely enough that we can actually watch it move over time. And watching it move over time tells us about a variety of active processes on the Earth. And so I'm going to show you a little bit about my science just by showing you a few slides that show data, just observations, and we won't go into too many gory details here. This is what we would call a time series of positions. So the upper panel is latitude or north-south motion, and the bottom panel is longitude east-west motion. Each little dot is an individual daily measurement, and it has a little error bar on it, which you may or may not be able to see very clearly, but you can see it started out with some sort of trend, and then all of a sudden there was a jump. And then there was something curvy that happened after the jump. So what are these? This trend was caused by a variety of factors, including mostly long-term tectonics, but this jump was the result of an earthquake. So earthquakes not only shake the ground and so on, but also cause permanent displacement, permanent deformation of the Earth. That's because the earthquake is due to slip on a fault. There's actually motion happening within the Earth, and that deforms not just the area where the fault reaches the surface, but actually the whole, really the whole Earth, although when you get far enough away, it's really, really small. So this is what we would call a coseismic offset. It means it came with the earthquake. And then what we see, if we took the trend from before the earthquake, it would be this blue line. And the deviation from that is what we call post-seismic deformation. So not only does the earthquake cause an immediate effect, but the earthquake is essentially a redistribution of force within the Earth. And that causes changes in the motion either of the fault zone itself or in the Earth's mantle. So the Earth's mantle is a viscoelastic material. That means over geologic timescales it flows like a fluid, whereas over very short timescales it behaves like a solid. So when you change the forces, you change the way the mantle and other similar kinds of parts of the Earth behave. So we use these measurements of coseismic and post-seismic deformation to first of all study the earthquake. And then these measurements here let us look at some of the dynamics behind tectonics on the planet. And in this particular case, this is a site near Fairbanks, Alaska, and it's maybe at the very end of this time, which is 2018, 15 years after the earthquake, getting back to this original trend. But these transients from earthquakes last years to decades. And this is a way of looking at it in map view, and the colors are still not that great, are they? There's black arrows and green arrows. The green arrows are the big ones, if you can't tell the colors apart. The black was before the earthquake, and the green was an average of a period of time after the earthquake. So what we were seeing in time on the previous slide, this is mapping out in space how those changes occur. And essentially where the changes are big, which were in the areas maybe 50 kilometers away from the fault, so the earthquake ruptured along here, and some of these areas that were, say 25 to 75 kilometers away from the fault is where we see these maximum post-seismic displacements. And that's actually telling us that it's coming from a deep source. So it's coming mostly from the upper mantle at that, or the lower crust at that point. So another way that the Earth deforms under a changing force is to look at essentially weighing the water. So if we had undergraduates, I might not be able to use this analogy because they may never have actually seen a scale that didn't just have a digital readout. But you can still find grocery stores where you put your potatoes in the basket and a spring extends and it weighs your produce. Okay, so we can actually use the Earth to weigh the mass of water on the surface. And it really integrates surface water, snow and ice, groundwater, everything that's at or near the surface. And what we're looking at here is the height or the vertical motion of a site in southeast Alaska. It's on this little island in Lynn Canal near Juneau and near the Juneau ice field, which would be just beyond these mountains. So you can see the dots. The site goes up and down, up and down, up and down. It has a long-term trend that's up. That long-term uplift rate is 22 millimeters per year, so it's close to an inch per year, which is really, really fast for the Earth. And that's due to a combination of present-day ice loss and post-Little Ice Age ice loss. So essentially, the last glacier advance in the region hit its maximum in the 1700s and has been declining since then and declining much more rapidly through the 20th century and even more rapidly through the 21st century. So that's what's contributing mostly to this uplift. But the seasonal up and down of the surface, which is about a 30 millimeter peak to trough signal, is actually due to the accumulation and melt of snow. That is the dominant part. There would also be some other water components in there, but the snow turns out to be the biggest here. So really, the Earth's surface is going up and down that much here on an annual basis as the water mass change. And you can see in the scale here, that's 6 centimeters and so on, but you can see this signal quite clearly. There's definitely some noise, but it's way bigger than the noise. So we're able to actually learn quite a bit about these kinds of processes. This is pretty extreme, but it's even more extreme in some places. If you go to the Amazon, you can find up to 8 centimeters peak to trough seasonal deformation due to the water loading in the Amazon. So really enormous signals that we're very well capable of measuring. Here's a Michigan example. Again, the map is a little bit washed out, but this is the Straits of the Mackinac Straits here. So this is a site that's on the edge of Lake Michigan. Traverse City is down here somewhere. And this is not my own analysis. It comes from the University of Nevada, Reno. And this just shows the vertical component. So the scale is in millimeters, so there's a centimeter right there. And there's a red line, which you can't see very well, but it's actually all right because the red line I don't think actually makes much sense. It's what they did in just assuming a seasonal term. But you can see this sort of long period variations in the vertical motion of this site. And that's dominated by lake loading. The other signal we'll see across Michigan is a very slow upward tilt to the north, which is the response to the previous melting of the ice sheets. We still see that response, but these short-term variations are probably entirely due to lake loading. So there's actually quite a few sites in Michigan. We'll see what we can see in terms of lake loading on these sort of interannual and also perhaps some very short time scales. We should be able to see the redistribution of water in storms, for example, should actually produce a measurable signal in these data. Okay, so what will I be studying here? And this is my last slide. So this is just, some of these are ongoing things that I'm continuing and some new things I'll start. But be looking at slip variations in subduction zones. So subduction zones where one plate pushes under the other is where the greatest earthquakes on the planet occur. And what we want to do is look at how the slip on that interface happens in space and time, whether it's steady, whether it's episodic, and so on. So not just looking at earthquakes, but actually looking at steady motions and also kind of creep events that occur in these faults that produce the biggest earthquakes. So we'll look in Alaska, also revisit some areas in Central and South America as well. I'll continue to look at large-scale continental deformation. This is really sort of in Alaska and China, where I've been working for a number of years. Why are plate boundaries in the continents so broadly distributed and complex? So India is colliding with the Eurasian plate, and it produces over more than 1,000 kilometers. It produces earthquakes, active deformation across most of China. Okay, so understanding how these processes occur and why they are the way they are is a long-term problem that I've been working on for quite a while. I'll work on post-glacial rebound, hydrologic loading, and sea level. So how does the Earth surface respond to changing surface lows, and how does this affect relative sea level change? So actually one of the biggest impacts in the variation of sea level change from place to place actually comes from the deformation of the solid Earth. And so this is something that we can work on and model. And active volcanism and lithospheric loading. I'm actually going to start some new things in Hawaii and perhaps in Iceland, looking at whether these islands are actually continue to subside under the growing weight of the volcanoes. So again, the mass added to the volcano by continual intrusion of magma up from the mantle, whether it's erupted or whether it stays intruded below the surface, is ultimately causing the islands to subside. Can we measure that, or also what could be happening in the deep roots of the magmatic systems? And right now, the measurement networks in these places are not well posed for looking at these deep problems. People are looking at the shallow parts of the systems, but by looking at the deep parts of the systems, it's a long-term project, a long-term need for data, but that has some unique opportunities. And that's something that I can actually use this endowment and the endowment funds to get going when it's something that you can't do in a 3-year NSF project, but something that might require a decade. So we can get that started with the endowment funds and hopefully eventually get money to actually do that science. And well, if not, then maybe we'll just do it anyway. That's sort of the beauty of having some resources. Thank you.